Millionaire returns home early and shocked by what the maid did for his children. A successful businessman who seemed unshakable as steel nearly collapsed when he discovered what the nanny had quietly done out of a love for his children greater than anything she felt for herself. For years, Damian Carter had only returned to his spacious Seattle home when the clock was close to striking midnight. His schedule was suffocating, 14 hours a day, 6 days a week. That rhythm had continued for 3 years, ever since Vanessa left with her Italian lover, abandoning Ben and Madeline in a state of panic without so much as a backward glance. That Thursday, in early December, a fine Seattle drizzle fell, thin as a veil. A sudden cancellation of an investor meeting brought Damian home at 7. The moment the dark wooden door swung open, he froze at the threshold. A soft lullaby, light as drifting wind, was floating from somewhere upstairs. The melody was so familiar it revived fragments of long-lost memories he thought had disappeared since the days he lay in his own mother's arms. Damian walked slowly up the wooden stairs, each step feeling as though it led him into another world. The sound guided him to the children's room. Through the slightly open door, he saw Grace Johnson sitting between the 2 small beds. One hand gently soothed Madeline, while the other held Ben's hand tightly. Warm, golden light cast a soft glow over her face, serene and impossibly gentle. The 2 children gazed at her with absolute trust, an expression Damian had never once received from them, despite being their father. "Miss Grace, can you tell the story about the fawn who lost its mother again?" Ben whispered, his voice soft and pleading. Grace smiled and adjusted his blanket. "Another time, Ben. Tonight you both need to sleep early." Suddenly, Madeline sat up and wrapped her tiny arms around Grace's neck. "I love you the most in the whole world, Miss Grace." A sharp pain gripped Damian's chest as if someone had taken hold of his heart. His children had never hugged him like that. They had never spoken those words to him. He stood frozen, watching Grace press a gentle kiss to each child's forehead before turning off the light. When she stepped toward the door, Damian quickly backed away and went downstairs to avoid being seen. Through the glass wall facing the backyard, he saw Grace carrying an old cloth bag, quietly leaving the house near 8 p.m. Her contract required her to work only from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m., but she stayed late just to lull his children to sleep. No one asked her to, no one paid her extra, and she had never once mentioned it. That night, Damian knew he could no longer ignore what he had seen. He called Claire, the family's longtime housekeeper, into his study to ask for the truth. Claire, who had been with the Carter family for more than 15 years, stiffened at Damian's question. She adjusted her reading glasses before answering in a slightly trembling voice. "Sir, she does all of that voluntarily." Damian frowned. "Voluntarily how?" "The children, especially Ben, have had trouble sleeping ever since Mrs. Vanessa left. Grace said she couldn't bear to let them cry alone. She asked to stay a little longer to help them fall asleep." Damian stood still. "Why didn't anyone tell me this?" "Grace asked us to keep it quiet. She said you were already under too much stress and—" Claire hesitated. She refused to accept any overtime pay. A heavy emotion rose in Damian's chest, not anger, but a mixture of confusion and an unnamed shame. "I want you to tell me everything about how Grace cares for the children. Don't leave anything out." Claire took a deep breath. "Sir, Grace is the only anchor Ben and Madeline have right now. When Ben has panic attacks at night, she sits beside him, holds his hand until he can breathe steadily again. She created a routine that helps him calm down. And Madeline, she hasn't let anyone but Grace brush her hair since the day her mother left." Damian froze. Panic attacks? Since when has Ben had those? Since the day Mrs. Vanessa left Seattle. His breathing becomes rapid, his hands turn cold, his whole body shakes. We took him to the doctor, but Grace discovered that if she breathed with him and hummed softly, he calmed down much faster. Damien was stunned. His son had been suffering from anxiety, and he had known nothing about it. "And there's more," Claire continued. "There were times Grace asked me to help her make long-distance calls to her mother, who is caring for her son in Texas." Damien felt something tighten inside his chest. "Wait," he cut in. "She has a child?" "Yes, Oliver, 8 years old, the same age as Ben. He lives with his grandmother." Claire sighed. "Grace sends nearly all her earnings back home. She said the family is poor, her mother is ill, there are medical bills, school expenses. She keeps almost nothing for herself except bus fare and a little money for food." A vivid image flashed through Damien's mind. A rainy night, an old cloth bag, a young woman hurrying out the side gate with her head bowed, while his own children slept peacefully because of her lullaby. The next day, he stayed home. He told his secretary to cancel all meetings and only put through urgent calls. He made his own coffee, sat at the dining table, and observed from a distance. At exactly 7 a.m., Grace arrived. The rain was still falling lightly as she stepped inside, removed her shoes, and slipped into the house slippers by the door, a familiar old habit. When she noticed Damien sitting in the kitchen, she startled slightly. "Good morning, Mr. Carter." She adjusted the strap of her bag. "I thought you had already left." "I'm working from home today," Damien replied simply. Madeline came running in, hugging Grace's leg, her hair messy and her pajamas crooked. "Miss Grace, last night I dreamed I was a star in the sky." "Really?" Grace laughed, bending down. "Then you must shine extra bright this morning." Ben followed behind, his hair rumpled as well, clutching a stuffed bear. I slept," he said softly, as if announcing a great victory. "I'm proud of you," Grace said gently, giving his hand a small squeeze. Damien suddenly realized he had never used the word proud with his children in such a tender way. "Miss Grace, can you come to my performance this afternoon?" Madeline asked shyly. "What performance, sweetheart?" "Today is Mother's Day at school. Each student has to sing a song for their mom. But my mom isn't here." The sentence trailed off, but the embarrassment and sadness were clear. Grace gently stroked her hair. "I'll come. What time do you perform?" 3 o'clock. Damien knew very well that 3 o'clock was the time Grace normally cleaned the 3rd floor. Yet she smiled softly, as if nothing mattered more in that moment than Madeline. "I'll sit in the front row and cheer for you." At 3 p.m., Damien sat in his car, parked a few houses away from Greenwood Elementary. He had told Grace that he had a meeting nearby and could drop her off, but when they arrived, he stopped, pretended to receive a conference call, and told her to go ahead. In truth, he called no one. He sat there, looking through the windshield, watching Grace hurry into the school with Madeline running beside her, holding her hand. 5 minutes later, he turned off the engine and walked toward the gate. The smell of damp wood, children's laughter, and announcements over the speakers filled the air. Inside the small auditorium, parents and children sat in rows. Damien stood behind the door, watching. He saw Grace seated in the back row. She wore a simple, clean coat, her hair neatly tied back. Her smile glowed like sunlight. When the performance ended, Madeline ran off the stage and threw her arms around Grace. Grace lifted her up and kissed her forehead. A parent sitting nearby turned and asked, "Are you Madeline's mother? You two seem so close." Grace flushed, flustered. "Oh, no, I'm just her nanny. I work for the Carter family." The woman raised her chin slightly. "Oh, but the little girl talks about you all the time. I thought—" Damien saw Grace gently pull her hand away from Madeline and step aside, as if afraid she had crossed a boundary she wasn't supposed to. His chest tightened. He stepped in, breaking the awkward moment. "Excuse me, I'm late. I'm Damien Carter, Madeline's father." He turned to the woman. "And this is Grace. She's been an incredible help to our family. Without her, I don't know what would have happened to the three of us." Grace looked at him, a flicker of astonishment in her eyes. And in that brief moment, Damien realized he had just done something he had never done before, publicly acknowledging the worth of someone who had always worked quietly in the background. That evening, Damien asked Claire to take the children upstairs first. He remained in the living room, waiting for Grace to finish washing the dishes. When she hung up her rubber gloves and wiped her hands on a cloth towel, he spoke up. "Grace, could you sit down? I'd like to talk." She startled slightly at the way he addressed her, but she still pulled out the chair across from him. "Yes?" "I learned that you have a son," Damien said, trying to keep his voice steady. "His name is Oliver, right?" Grace immediately lowered her head, her hands tightening together unconsciously. "Claire told you already? I'm sorry. I didn't mean to bring my personal life into work." "There's nothing to apologize for," Damien said softly. "I'm just surprised that after 3 years I never knew about it." "That was my choice." She forced a small smile. "A workplace should be somewhere you leave your personal problems at the door, shouldn't it?" "Not necessarily, especially when those personal problems prevent you from seeing your own child." He leaned forward. "How long has it been since you last saw Oliver?" Grace pressed her lips together. Half a second of silence passed before she exhaled. 8 months. Damien blinked. 8 months? You haven't flown home to visit him? Plane tickets are expensive, Mr. Carter. She smiled, though her eyes were beginning to redden. If I saved for a few months, I might be able to buy a ticket, but my mother is sick. Medicine, hospital fees. Oliver needs new clothes, books for school, I think. He needs my money more than he needs me there for just a couple of days. The way she said, "I think," carried all the silent battles she had fought and lost inside herself. "Yet you still stay late at my house to put my children to sleep," Damien said quietly. "Your little ones, they didn't do anything wrong," Grace whispered. "They were abandoned by their mother. I know what that feels like. When I'm here with them, sometimes I imagine someone in Texas is also reading to Oliver. Maybe it's foolish, but it makes my heart hurt less." Damien had no idea how to respond. In his mind echoed the question that had surfaced again and again over the past few weeks. Am I even a good father? "Mr. Carter, may I leave a little early tonight? Is something wrong? Tomorrow is my son's birthday. I want to call him right at midnight." Grace's face lit up at the mention of her child, but beneath that light was a deep, aching sadness. "You're not buying him a present?" "I sent money home so my mom could buy him a small cake and some candy. That's all I can manage for now." When Grace left the house, Damien remained sitting in the empty dining room for a long time. Tomorrow was the 9th birthday of a child, the son of the woman who loved and cared for his children as if they were her own. And the only gift that boy would receive was a small cake bought far away. Damien felt his chest tighten as if someone were squeezing his heart. Oliver's 9th birthday arrived quietly. Grace still came to the Carters' home on time with her usual gentle smile, though the dark circles under her eyes were much deeper. When Damien unintentionally walked into the kitchen and saw her sitting in a corner making a video call to her son, he paused. On the small phone screen appeared the face of a little boy with curly brown hair and bright dark eyes, framed by an old wooden house behind him. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. Something came up last night, and I couldn't call to wish you happy birthday. I sent your present. Please don't be upset with me," Grace said, forcing a smile. "Or maybe I'll find a way to bring you to Seattle to be with me." "It's okay, Mom," Oliver grinned, showing his missing teeth. "I have Grandma here, and some friends. Grandma says you're working really hard so we can have a future." Grace bit her lip. "But I miss you." Oliver held up an old worn toy car to the screen. "I got your present. I'm really happy." The video ended, the screen going dark. Grace set the phone down, sat still for a moment, her hand lingering over the empty space where her son's face had just been. She wiped her tears with the back of her hand, took a deep breath, then stood, squared her shoulders, and went back to work as if nothing had happened. Damien stood in the doorway, feeling a sharp ache spread through his chest. That morning he went to the office, but he couldn't focus on a single report. At 9 o'clock, he called his assistant. "Rachel, cancel everything today. I need your help with something else." "You have a call with the Singapore Investment Fund today, sir." "Cancel it," Damien said firmly, "and find me a same-day delivery service to El Paso, Texas." 2 hours later, a small delivery truck stopped in front of the house where Grace's mother lived with Oliver. Inside were a blue bicycle, a box of building toys, several new outfits, school supplies, and a large birthday cake with 9 candles neatly placed on top. The card attached contained only one short sentence. "For Oliver, happy birthday, from Ben and Madeline." The next morning, when Grace arrived at the house, her eyes were red, but not from lack of sleep this time. "Mr. Carter." She hurried into his study, gripping her phone tightly. "My mom just called. A delivery truck came to her house. There's a new bicycle, a Captain America backpack, books, warm clothes, and a huge birthday cake." Damien twirled a pen between his fingers absent-mindedly. "Who do you think sent it?" Grace shook her head slowly. "My family is struggling. No one can afford to send that many gifts. And there was a card signed by Ben and Madeline." Damien spoke quietly. "The kids care about Oliver. I just asked Rachel to arrange a little something." Grace looked at him, tears welling in her eyes. "Mr. Damien, I truly don't know what to say. That's the kindest thing anyone has ever done for my son." "That was Ben and Madeline's wish," he replied, though the truth wasn't entirely that simple. She broke down crying, covering her face with both hands. Damien stood up instinctively and took a step toward her, then hesitated. He wasn't sure if he had the right to place a hand on her shoulder. Only when she took a long breath, lowered her hands, and attempted a watery smile did he finally say, "Grace, you've done so much for my family. I'm only giving back a fraction." "I didn't do it to receive anything," she said softly. "I did it because I love the kids." He met her eyes. "I know." And perhaps for the first time, he truly understood the weight of those words. Time passed, and the Carter household slowly changed its rhythm. Damien began coming home earlier, at least 3 evenings a week. He learned how to sit on the living room floor and build Lego sets with Ben, listening to the boy talk about his fear of presenting in front of class instead of simply asking, "What grade did you get?" He learned how to brush Madeline's hair. At first, Grace stood back, watching like an audience member witnessing characters she had carefully nurtured, finally learning to walk and smile. But soon, the children pulled her in, turning every playtime into all 4 of us. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Damien leaned against the doorway, watching Grace tuck in their blankets and straighten the stuffed toys by their pillows. The warm light from the bedside lamp glowed across her hair and the space-themed posters on the wall. It was such an ordinary scene, but to him, it felt like a miracle. "Grace," he said softly, once both children were breathing evenly. "May I ask you something?" "Yes, sir?" "Why have you never remarried? You're young, kind, and full of love." Grace froze for a moment. She looked toward the window where the children lay sleeping peacefully in the soft afternoon glow. "After Oliver's father left, I focused on working and raising my son. I didn't have time for myself. And when I came here, Ben and Madeline took up such a big place in my heart. Taking care of someone else's children while your own is far away? That must be difficult. Grace swallowed a tight ache in her throat. It is difficult, sir. But when I take care of Ben and Madeline, it feels like I'm also taking care of Oliver. It helps me miss him a little less. Damien felt something twist inside his chest. Grace had transformed her own heartbreak into love for his children. I want to propose something, he said gently. I want to raise your salary, significantly. And, if you agree, I can cover the costs for Oliver to move to Seattle. He could live with his grandmother here, or... He hesitated. If you'd prefer, I can rent an apartment nearby for you two. That way, you won't have to be apart anymore. Grace stared at him as if she had just heard something impossible. Mr. Carter, that's too much. I can't accept that. I don't want to be a burden. This isn't charity, Damien said firmly. You're doing the work of 3 people for my family. You're the housekeeper, the children's companion, and practically their emotional counselor. Your salary doesn't reflect that. As for Oliver, consider it an investment in a future I believe is worth supporting. She bit her lip as fresh tears gathered. I need time to think. Of course, Damien nodded. Just don't take another 8 months to decide. This time Grace laughed. The sound was still tinged with worry, but there was a spark of hope in it. 1 week later, everything was arranged. Oliver and his grandmother would move to Seattle at the end of the month. A small apartment near the Carter home had already been rented. His enrollment papers for the private school Ben and Madeline attended had also been approved. On the day the boy and his grandmother arrived, the weather was unusually sunny, the clouds drifting away from the green hills of pine. Damien drove with Grace to the airport. She was so nervous her hands trembled, whispering over and over, I wonder if he's grown. I wonder if he's angry with me. Oliver emerged from the domestic arrivals gate with a red backpack on his shoulders, an oversized gray hoodie, and wide eyes scanning the crowd. When he spotted Grace, he froze for a moment, as if he couldn't believe it. Then he dropped his suitcase and sprinted toward her. Mom! Grace sank to her knees, wrapping her arms around him, an embrace that felt like both an apology and a desperate attempt to hold on to the most precious thing in her life before the world could take it back. Damien watched from a few steps away, feeling as though he was witnessing the final piece of a long-missing puzzle, finally locking into place. That evening, the Carter home was livelier than ever. Ben and Madeline fought over who got to show Oliver the house's treasures, from Damien's game room to the treehouse in the yard to the secret nook under the staircase where the kids hid random, important things. Can you stay here forever? Madeline asked eagerly. Oliver glanced at Grace, then at Damien, a flicker of caution in his eyes. If it doesn't bother anyone, he whispered. It doesn't bother anyone, Damien replied. The more people in this house, the better. Grace turned to him, her expression a mixture of gratitude and astonishment, as though she were seeing a completely different Damien from the man who used to rush through the house 3 years earlier, eyes fixed only on his phone. In the days that followed, everything changed completely. Oliver adapted faster than anyone expected. The 3 children were inseparable, eating together, studying together, playing together. And Grace? She blossomed in every sense of the word. She sang while cooking, smiled even while folding laundry, and looked 10 years younger. One morning, Grace said softly, Mr. Damien, I truly don't know how to thank you. Damien shook his head. No need to thank me. You deserve it. Grace looked at him, her eyes deep and searching. But why did you do all this for me and my son? Damien was silent for a few seconds before answering honestly. Because you loved Ben and Madeline in a way that I never did. You made me realize how much I had lost. Grace shook her head immediately. No, sir. You've always tried your best for the children. But I wasn't there when they needed me most. I didn't know how anxious Ben was, or what Madeline's favorite song is. Things you know better than I do. Grace smiled gently. That night, Madeline had a violent nightmare and woke up screaming. Damien and Grace rushed into the room at almost the same moment. Madeline, what's wrong, sweetheart? Damien pulled her into his arms. I dreamed you would leave me like Mom did. Damien's chest tightened as if something were squeezing him from the inside. He carried Madeline to his own room and sat down beside her. Madeline, look at me. I will never leave you. Never. Do you believe me? Do you really promise? I promise. Damien turned to Grace, who was standing silently in the doorway. And, if you want, Grace will always be here with you too. Grace stepped forward, her voice warm as a winter blanket. Sweetheart, I'm always here for you. And Oliver too. Madeline finally stopped crying and fell asleep in Damien's arms. When Damien laid her back in her bed and stepped into the hallway, he found Grace still standing there. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For making Oliver feel accepted, like he belongs here. Damien looked into her eyes. Oliver belongs here, Grace. Both of you do? That night, Damien lay awake for a long time. He realized that in just 3 short months, his life had changed completely. A house that had once been cold and hollow had become a home filled with laughter. And the person who made that possible was Grace. 3 months later, they held a small party. Damien stood on the porch, watching the children run around with balloons, their faces smeared with cake. Grace moved back and forth between the kitchen and the living room, straightening tablecloths and making sure everyone had food. As she walked past him, Damien gently tugged on her sleeve. Come here for a moment, he said. She looked surprised, but followed him out to the backyard. The string lights hanging from the maple tree cast a warm golden glow across her face. The children's laughter drifted from inside like background music. Grace. Damien stood before her, his hands tucked into his pockets to hide their shaking. I've thanked you many times, I know, but there's something I still haven't said. She blinked. What is it? He took a deep breath. You didn't just save the kids. You saved me. He looked into her eyes, speaking slowly. Before you came into this house, I was a man running from loneliness by burying myself in work. I thought I was doing the best for my children, when really, I was abandoning them a little more every day. And you, somehow, you pulled me back. You taught me how to stay in a room when my child cries, instead of walking out because I'm afraid I won't know what to do. Grace let out a soft laugh and shook her head. I only did what any normal person would do. No? Damien stepped closer, his palms damp. Not everyone would spend 8 months away from their own child, caring for someone else's every night, then refuse extra help because they fear being seen as opportunistic. Not everyone has the courage to stand in court and say they love children who don't share their blood as if they were their own. That isn't normal? He paused. For the first time in his life, Damien felt afraid to say something, but he had learned that some things, if left unspoken, turn into new wounds. I love you, Grace, he said, his voice lower. Not because of what you've done for me or for the kids, but because of who you are, because of how you see the world, how you see family, how you see your own scars. I love the way you sit on the floor to build tiny block towers with the kids as if nothing in the world is more urgent. I love the way you sing, even when you go off key. I love the way you hide your sadness just so the kids won't worry. Grace stood motionless. She had imagined many things in her life. One day having her son live near her, one day saving enough for a small house in the suburbs, One day, no longer hopping on and off buses with exhaustion. But she had never dared imagine this. "Damien," she swallowed, "are you sure? I'm your employee. I'm a single mother. I don't fit into your world. People will say I'm taking advantage." "I used to fear that's exactly why you would refuse," Damien murmured. "But the things people say won't help a child through a nightmare, and they definitely won't hold you when you're exhausted." He reached out and gently took her hand. "I don't need a perfect-on-paper wife. I need someone who makes home feel like a place with real light, not just motion sensor lamps. I need you." Grace's eyes shimmered. "And Oliver? I don't want him to feel like an outsider." "I want him to be my son," Damien said without hesitation. "If you ever agree, I want to adopt him, on paper and in my heart, just like Ben and Madeline accepted him long ago." She laughed through her tears. "Do you know you're saying things not many people in this world would dare to promise?" "I know," he squeezed her hand. "But I've spent half my life making promises to investors about the future of my products. It's time I made a promise about something that actually matters." For a moment, there was only silence. Then Madeline's voice echoed from inside. "Daddy! Miss Grace! The cake is ready." Grace looked toward the bright doorway, then back at Damien. Her heart pulled in two directions, and for the first time, both sides were full. She smiled so softly it trembled. "If you're truly sure, then yes." "Yes? Means what exactly?" Damien teased, though his eyes were already shining. "It means, I love you too," she whispered. "And I agree, to see if this can become what the kids call a real home." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight, as if she were the one gift he intended to keep safe for the rest of his life. 6 months later, they held a small wedding in the backyard. Madeline and Oliver were the flower kids. Ben carried the rings. Claire sat in the front row, tears slipping down the corners of her aging eyes. Vanessa was there too, standing a little distance away, neither intruding nor leaving, her expression a mix of regret and relief, like someone who had finally learned what it meant to place her children's happiness above her pride. Instead of a luxurious 5-course reception, they grilled food outdoors while the kids ran around with their shirts untucked. Damien didn't wear a tie. He was in a simple white shirt with his sleeves rolled up, and the usual tension on his forehead seemed to have vanished. When the officiant asked, "Do you promise to love, honor, and stay, even when staying becomes harder than leaving?" Damien looked at Grace, remembering all the nights he wasn't where he should have been, and smiled. "I've been gone long enough," he replied. "Now I just want to learn how to stay. So yes, I promise." The officiant turned to Grace. "And you?" Grace looked at the 3 children standing behind her, Oliver grinning, Madeline clutching an oversized bouquet, Ben staring at her with no fear left in his eyes. "I promise to love you," she said, making the guests chuckle. "But I'll also remind you when you're wrong. I promise to protect the children as if they were my own, and I'll remember that family isn't something you're given. It's something you build every day with very small things." As the evening breeze rustled through the maple leaves, carrying children's laughter and the soft cheers of the adults, Damien thought, 3 years ago, this house was only a beautiful shell, empty on the inside. Today it was so full that even sound seemed to overflow. That night, when the children were exhausted and climbed into bed one by one, all 4 insisted on a bedtime story. "Not a sad story," Ben warned. "I'm tired of stories where people leave and don't come back." Grace sat in the armchair between the 2 beds, Damien on the edge of Ben's. She opened an old storybook, then closed it again and changed her mind. "All right," she said. Let Mom tell a story that isn't in any book." "What story is that?" Madeline asked, her eyes already drooping. "It's the story of a house on a hill," Grace smiled. "It was built of beautiful glass and wood, but for many years it was empty, filled only with the sound of the wind. Then one day, a few people who had lost their way wandered into it. A man who had forgotten how to stay, a few children who had forgotten how to trust, a little boy from far away, and a woman who didn't believe she deserved love. They stayed so long that the house ran out of room for sadness and had space only for laughter." "Make it short, Mom," Oliver mumbled. "I'm sleepy." Grace laughed softly and leaned down to kiss each child's forehead. Damien also bent forward, kissing Madeline's hair and placing a hand on Ben's chest, feeling the boy's heartbeat, steady and strong. He looked over at Grace, and they shared a silent understanding. "Sleep, little ones," Damien whispered. "We have a lot to do tomorrow, and someday when you're older, I'll tell you another story about a man who spent half his life learning what family truly means." "Tell it now," Madeline mumbled in a dreamlike voice. "No," Damien smiled, "because that story is still being written." The nightlight dimmed. Outside, Seattle sank into its damp darkness. But in the small upstairs bedroom, something shone brighter than any lamp. The quiet sense of security felt by 4 children who whispered, "Good night, Dad. Good night, Mom Grace." And Damien knew that, for the first time in his life, he could close his eyes without fearing he would wake up in an empty house. Because now, he didn't just have a house. He had a family.